So thank you once again, Melanie, for joining in, and it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Oh,
You being such a prominent face in the animal rights movement worldwide, I'm sure we'll be able to touch a lot of aspects related to veganism and we'll be able to reach out to a lot of people here in India and outside as well with your insights. So thank you, and it means a lot to us.
yeah, well, thank you. It's a pleasure. And I was in India actually a few years ago talking to different vegan groups, and I felt very excited and very honored to be doing the work there. So it's a lot of great stuff happening in India for animals.
Great. So, starting with, I'm sure there will be a lot of people who already know your journey, but for those who are not aware about it, can you share your personal experience and journey of what led you to embrace veganism?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, my personal experience is really what led me to do the work that I do today. Like many people in the world, I was a person who cared about animals. I had a lot of compassion for animals. I would never want to harm them. I had a dog who I loved, like a family member. And I also grew up eating meat, eggs, and dairy. And I just never really thought about, I never made the connection between like the meat or eggs or dairy on my plate and a living being that once was, that individual had once been. I didn't make the connection. And then in 1989, I ate a contaminated hamburger, and I was 23 years old, and I ended up in the hospital, extremely sick. I had to get intravenous antibiotics. And after that experience, I just stopped eating meat. And because I was disgusted, not because of any reason, where I was thinking about, not consciously, the ethics. And so I had to learn about how to cook for myself. And I started learning about vegetarianism. And that learning led me to learn about animal agriculture and the harm it's causing, incredible harm it's causing to animals, to the planet, and to human health as well. I quickly became vegan after that. And then what happened was that I was telling people about my new lifestyle, my new diet, and everybody I talked to were like, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal, or they'd call me a radical vegan hippie propagandist. And so they just shut the conversation down. And that led me to do my research on the psychology of eating animals. And that led me to discover or identify what I came to call carnism, which is the invisible belief system that conditions people to eat certain animals and causes people to feel defensive against information that would help free their minds from carnism.
Right. So coming to carnism, I think this concept of carnism has gained worldwide popularity now, all thanks to you. So would you mind shedding some light on its significance with us?
Well, thank you. We still have a long way to go to raise awareness about carnism. I think when enough people understand what carnism is, I think it will really change the public conversation that we're having about eating animals. So the reason that I think carnism is so important to understand is because it's hard to get people on board with a solution to a problem, like get people to become vegan when they don't really see the problem in the first place. And especially if they've been conditioned to not to see the problem and to resist seeing the problem. But when people learn about carnism, this psychology that we've all inherited by being born into animal eating cultures, and this includes cultures, dairy is an animal product, right? So there's also the same psychology around eating dairy products. It's when people become aware of carnism and the way it's affected them psychologically, carnism loses a lot of its power over their psyches, and people become much more open to changing their behaviors. And, it's, as you know, animal agriculture is a leading cause of some of the most serious environmental problems facing the world today, not the least of which is climate change. It is the leading cause of animal exploitation in the world. It is a leading cause of human health problems, and it's really, really important that we address this issue. I really wrote Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows because I wanted people to, be able to make choices, food choices that reflect what they authentically think and feel rather than what they've been conditioned to think and feel. We can't, without awareness, there's no free choice.
Agreed, absolutely. So coming to your books, Melanie, we all know your book Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows has made a worldwide impact. So would you like to share some insights on exactly what kind of tangible impact has the book brought on in terms of the veganism movement?
That's a good question. I mean, my goal was that the book would have an impact in two ways, that it would help weaken carnism by raising awareness of carnism among people who eat animals, among non-vegans, and that would help strengthen veganism by helping vegans who are challenging carnism to understand the psychology of the people they're reaching out to more effectively, better, and to help them advocate more effectively. And the book is published in, I think, 22 languages now around the world. We still need to get the 10th anniversary edition just came out. It came out a couple of years ago, and we still need to find an Indian publisher so we can bring the book more effectively to India. But it has gotten a lot of great feedback from people who are not vegan. And also from people who are vegan. And so I think it has helped to start opening up this conversation. I think it's really important to have a conversation not only about veganism, but also about carnism, because it's impossible to have an objective conversation about eating animals if we're having that conversation from within the system that conditions us to thinking eating animals is the right thing to do.
So your next book is also about to hit the shelf, which is How to End Injustice Everywhere. So would you mind sharing a little bit about that too?
Sure. I mean, in a lot of ways, in many ways, How to End Injustice Everywhere evolved out of the work that I did identifying carnism and deconstructing the structure and psychology of that system. All injustices such as racism, patriarchy, casteism, animal exploitation, and environmental degradation, they all stem from the same mentality. And I call this the non-relational mentality. What this mentality does is it causes us to relate in ways that are dysfunctional to other individuals, between social groups, and also to non-human animals and the environment. So we relate to animals in a way that's dysfunctional when we cause harm to them. We relate to other humans in ways that are dysfunctional when we create harm and unjust power imbalances. This mentality, this non-relational mentality, is also the primary cause of infighting, right? And a lot of people who are working to end injustice in the world find that they are struggling because there's so much infighting in their own movements and groups to end injustice, and that's really reducing the effectiveness of the work. So it reduces the effectiveness of the very groups that are working to end injustice. But when we understand this non-relational mentality, like really what it is and how it affects us and how it gets expressed, and we learn and we understand how to shift the mentality, we can much more effectively help to end injustice everywhere, whether we're talking about ending injustice against animals, humans, or the planet.
Right. So as you rightly pointed out earlier, there are a lot of misconceptions and stereotypes about veganism in general. So what have you done and what can people generally take? What steps can the people take to address these stereotypes at the ground level?
Well, one key step is just recognizing the stereotypes for what they are. A lot of vegans believe in the negative messages they hear about themselves and end up feeling ashamed of themselves or apologetic for who and how they are. And this can be alleviated by understanding where these stereotypes come from. So carnism needs to keep itself alive. And one of the ways it keeps itself alive is by conditioning people to feel resistant against any information that would free them from carnistic thinking. And this means people are resistant against vegans. Vegans are the messengers of this information. One of the ways this resistance is created is by causing people to believe in these negative stereotypes. So, for example, often vegans are portrayed as overly emotional sentimentalists, right? You just care so much about animals, bleeding heart, whatever. Well, a person who is overly emotional, by definition, isn't rational. And a person who's not rational isn't worth listening to. So, these stereotypes are a form of shoot the messenger. If you shoot the messenger, you don't have to take seriously the implications of their message. And this stereotype of activists or people who are challenging an injustice being overly emotional is not new. It's been used to silence the voices of advocates throughout human history. So feminists who were working, the suffragettes who were working to get women the right to vote, were called hysterical. And the abolitionists who were working against African slavery were called sentimentalists. So we have to appreciate that the feelings of the emotions of grief and moral outrage that many vegans feel at the atrocity that is animal agriculture are healthy, legitimate responses to this global injustice. It's much more concerning to think about the widespread numbing of the dominant culture. That is much more concerning. So that's one stereotype. Vegans are sometimes stereotyped as biased whenever they challenge the bias of the dominant carnistic culture. This form of projection. Sometimes they're stereotyped as anti-human, as though you can't be pro-animal and pro-human at the same time, as though humans aren't animals. So there's a lot of different stereotypes, but when vegans recognize them, these stereotypes for what they are, they're much less likely to believe in them and then to feel ashamed of themselves. And I've heard many vegans apologize for their sensitivity. I mean, the problems in the world were not created because people are too sensitive. It's because people are not sensitive enough.
That's very beautifully said. And I think we have come a long way in terms of the vegan movement, but there are still a lot of bubbles to break and a long way to go. So what do you think, after a span of time, do you think we'll reach a point where the entire world will be a plant-based world?
I mean, I think if you look at the trajectory, the direction that veganism is heading in and the direction that carnism is heading in, there's a lot of hope in that. We do have a long way to go. It's true that meat consumption is increasing in some places in the world, but that's not a surprise. It's what happened with tobacco. When some places started to reduce their tobacco consumption, then big tobacco exported its problems to places in the world where people had less protection. And that's what's happening with meat consumption right now. But that's normal. That's the way change happens. I think, carnism is following the trajectory of other problematic systems like patriarchy and like racism. It continues to be a problem, but more and more people are waking up to it and more people are saying no.
Right. Nowadays, lab-grown meat is also in the news and everywhere, and people are increasingly consuming it. But many people believe that it does have some negative impacts on our health as well. So, what are your thoughts on it?
So I am not an expert on cultivated meat, or cultured meat, but I do know something about it, and I do know what the experts are saying. And what the experts are saying is that it is actually a lot healthier than eating meat from animals or animal products that are, the way that we eat them today. So, for example, animals are given antibiotics today, which then gets into the human system when humans eat those animals. So cultivated meat will not have the problem of antibiotics in it. It's less likely to have infection. I mean, there's a lot of disease and infection in slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants that will not be a concern either. And there won't be the same level of pathogens. And, we are in a race against time right now. If people continue to produce and consume meat anywhere close to the rate that they're doing so today, we're not going to have a planet left. So the least of our concerns, probably should be whether cultivated meat is not, as healthy as it could be. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So now coming to countries like India, although we have a huge majority who follows a vegetarian diet and cuisine, but veganism as a concept is fairly alien to a lot of people here. And milk and milk products, they constitute an integral part of the diet here in India. So what do you have to say about it? How do we tackle such an issue where the cuisine has a lot of dairy ingrained in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the great thing about having this conversation in India is the birthplace of vegetarianism. And, and ahimsa, which, as you know, compassion for all beings is such a central value in India, probably more so than anywhere in the world. And the problem that I experienced when I was in India talking about this is that many people in India who really do genuinely care and really do practice ahimsa and want to practice ahimsa are simply not aware of the fact that the dairy industry is so brutal and so damaging and dangerous. And so a lot of the conversation is really about raising awareness. Now, contemporary dairy farming, which was originally meant to honor the sacredness of the cow, is not the same as dairy farming was thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago even, right? Today, it follows the brutal Western carnistic production methods, where cows and buffaloes as well, they're forcibly impregnated, they're cruelly beaten, they're made to die painful deaths. And on top of this, I had read something in the Food Safety and Standards Authority of India said that almost 70% of the dairy that Indians consume is contaminated with additives. And this ranges from salt to detergent. So I think that I have a lot of hope for India because vegetarianism was birthed in India. And I had some very interesting conversations when I was there. And I think a lot of what needs to be done is to help people, because I know meat consumption is on the rise now in India as well. And it's kind of ironic because India could be a model for the rest of the world because there's such a huge population of vegetarians in India and such a strong identification with ahimsa. India could shine a light for the rest of the world. And I think the people in India, who are able to make their food choices freely, you have to have some privilege to make your food choices freely, of course, but the people who can choose what they eat can really work to, instead of becoming more like the West with its brutal carnistic practices, encourage the West to be more like India with its compassion and commitment to ahimsa. And adopt veganism. I think if Indians think of veganism as simply like a new vegetarianism, modern vegetarianism, that could also help with the conversation.
Yeah, well said. Also, I think now a lot of people are there who are promoting veganism actively and fiercely, but they may come across as a bit aggressive to the common people. So what changes would you suggest in their approach of promoting veganism?
Mm-hmm. And you said they may come across as what?
A little bit aggressive and rebellious when they promote veganism. So what do you have to say on that?
Yeah, I would say, so one thing is that activists are really doing a really great job. It is not easy to be vegan in a dominant carnistic world. It is not easy to be awake to the atrocity when other people are asleep to it and are complaining about you when you try to raise awareness of it. And, there's a lot of incredible work. It takes a lot of courage and integrity to live and speak your truth every day in the face of these pressures, that we live within. It makes sense that activists are sometimes aggressive because they feel urgent with this message. They understand how big the problem is and how serious the problem is. And aggression typically brings about the opposite outcomes of what we want. And so one of the things, I run the Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, and what we do is we provide materials, we have courses and we have trainings for anybody who wants to improve their communication and their outreach, their advocacy in general. And all of our courses are donation only. They go from whatever you can afford to free. The same thing for our trainings. We have a lot of materials to help people. So get informed about how to build effective communication, effective advocacy strategies. I have a book called Beyond Beliefs, and this is a guide for vegans, vegetarians, and meat eaters and relationships, and it has some tips about relating effectively in that. I have another book called Getting Relationships Right that's all about healthy relationships, so these can also be resources. They're all on our website. I would also suggest that advocates and activists not ask for all or nothing when they're advocating veganism, right? Often vegans think either you're vegan and you're part of the solution or you're not vegan and you're part of the problem. And then this creates a lot of resistance to the message that's unnecessary. I recommend inviting people to just be as vegan as possible and asking them, each meal, try to make it as vegan as possible. People are much less defensive, and this helps them move slowly toward veganism. I also recommend for vegans who are to invite people in their lives and in general to be what I call vegan allies. And that's a supporter of veganism and vegans, even though they're not fully vegan themselves. So people can use their efforts in whatever way to help the cause. You don't have to be vegan to help this cause. This cause needs all the help it can get. Some of the people who have done more for animals than anyone I've ever met are not vegan and not even vegetarian. They're actually meat eaters. They're meat eaters in the media who run stories about veganism and carnism and reach millions of readers, or they're meat eaters who publish books about the issue and push those books out to lots of people, or they're people who donate to organizations like mine so that we can do the work that we do. There's so many ways to help the cause.
Right. So taking a cue from that, I'm sure there are a lot of people who wish to switch to veganism, but due to some societal pressures or their personal preferences, they would be finding it a little bit difficult to make the switch. So what are some day-to-day routine steps they can take to switch to veganism slowly and gradually?
Yeah, well, the good thing is that you're in India, so the food is already incredible, and there's so much delicious vegan food. I know a lot of the food in some places in India is made with dairy, right? But that change, having visited with a lot of different vegans in India, that change is not that difficult, just to keep the dairy out. The food itself is just incredible, and it's naturally vegan if you don't add the dairy into it. My friend, Kathy Freston, who's also an author about she writes about veganism, she recommends that people who want to move toward veganism, they think about crowding out animal products rather than cutting them out. Just add more plants into your diet instead of feeling like you're taking the animals out of your diet. And when you add more plants, there's less room. And I think that people, like I was saying before, try to ask yourself if you can make each meal as vegan as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Great advice. And for wrapping up, where do you see the animal rights movement and the veganism movement 20 years from now?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I've started to change my language around the movements with the writing of my new book, How to End Injustice Everywhere. I realized that what we call the animal rights movement and the vegan movement and the animal liberation movement and the animal welfare movement are actually, I believe, are sub-movements of what I would call the animal justice movement. I think it's time that we get animal justice on the map of justice movements, alongside social justice, alongside justice for the environment, because the very same mentality that drives injustice against humans and the environment drives injustice against animals. And I would say I see this movement, I don't know about the timing, but everywhere I've been in the world, and I've been to about 50 countries now, I have seen support for animal justice, in particular veganism, growing. There has been no exception. And it's been actually pretty shocking to see. No matter where I go, this is what I see and this is what I hear about. So I don't know where we're going to be in 20 years, but what I do know is that there are a lot of indicators that suggest that this movement is growing, and it's growing quite quickly, and it's getting a lot of support. So I feel very optimistic about the direction that the movement is heading in.
Thank you so much, Melanie. I think we'll be able to make a lot of difference with your insights and after publishing the interview. And we are sure if it reaches the right people, it will have a massive
Yeah, thank you.